Very good morning to all of our viewers, and thank you for joining us today for the fifth installment in CESA's Protecting Lives and Livelihoods webinar series. My name is Nambulelo Manyana, and I will be your moderator for today as we unpack what it takes to build a capable state. Does it require the calculation and payment of reasonable professional fees, or does it have to do more with ensuring good service delivery and economic development? Before we delve into the presentations and the discussions, I'd like to start you off with the quote by John Ruskin. It is unwise to pay too much, but it is worse to pay too little. When you pay too little, you sometimes lose everything because the thing you bought was incapable of doing the thing you bought it to do. That's some food for thought for you as we will be unpacking what it really takes to build a capable state. Before we get into today's topic, I'd like to outline some house rules for our viewers. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see the GoToWebinar panel. Please use the questions section to submit any questions you have for our panelists. We will have a 20-minute question and answer session at the end of the webinar. We will try to answer as many of your questions as possible. Please also do note that Chris Campbell, CEO of CESA, will be joining us for the panel discussion session as a panelist. So if you have any questions you would like to ask and pose directly to CESA, he will be present to answer those questions. So please feel free to submit your questions as we go. We will also have some live polls during the course of today's webinar. These will pop up on your screen and you simply need to select your answer. As you all know, the country is currently under stage 5 of load shedding, and our speakers are joining this webinar remotely from various parts of South Africa. So please do bear with us should there be any technical issues due to load shedding, any lagging, or anyone falling off. Those will be resolved as quickly as possible. To unpack today's topic with me, we have Naomi Naidu, CESA board member and director at Pink Africa Consulting Engineers. We also have Professor Jean William from Stellenbosch University. We have Dr. Patrick Okonko, who's a researcher and contractor at 333 Engineering. We have Trevor Matabata, who's a chief engineer at the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. And last but certainly not least, we have Uzair Osman, who's a CESA YPF vice chairperson and candidate engineer at Bosch Products. A warm welcome to all of our panelists and thank you for joining us today. Each of our panelists will give a short presentation before our panel discussion, which will then be followed by the Q&A session. So please do remember to submit your questions as we go. First up, we have Naomi Naidu, who's the CESA board member and director at Pink Africa Consulting Engineers. She will be talking to us about the impact of discounting on service delivery and economic development.
Thank you, Nambo. Good morning to my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen joining online. I'm excited that we're having this conversation on this particular topic that's been plaguing our industry for the last few years. And it's probably been a hot topic of discussion for many professionals in the consulting engineering space, and more so in the last few years as we see the effects of it come into play. So in 2016, the Competition Commission ruled that the fee guidelines used in the built environment industry in South Africa are non-competitive and effectively result in price fixing. Previous to this, the Council did apply to have the practice of fee guidelines exempted from the Competition Act, but this application was rejected. Thus, following the 2016 ruling, a new era of what we call discounted fees emerged in the industry. The ironic aspect of this was that even though the fee scale was abolished, consultants continued to use this as a basis for discounts offered, and their clients followed suit by requesting discounts in some cases. So when we speak of discounted fees, it's actually fees that are lower than the previously gazetted fees. From this, the first question that arises is, do these low fees adequately compensate us to fulfill our full responsibility as the consultant engineer? The second question is, if it does not adequately compensate us, then what is the impact of this? In the past few years, I've seen tender prices plummeting to an all-time low, and it gets even worse with smaller private clients who now demand work done at risk or ridiculously low rates, which multiply when changes are brought on board for designs. From my own experience and many other consultants, I can definitely say that the lower fees definitely do not compensate us adequately. With regard to the impact of the low pricing from consultants, well, I've noted a few points for which I'm sure many of you are familiar with and may even want to add your comments of some of your own experiences on the chat as well. But if I'm looking at the impact of service delivery when consultants do not adequately cost their services, the first one that comes to mind is, are we providing value for money? And value for money in this sense refers to providing a quality, cost-effective solution to the client with due consideration to life cycle analysis, taking into account the environmental and social aspects. Pricing low means a limited budget. And while most professionals are ethically bound to maintain the quality produced, there are other aspects that suffer. Firstly, are we offering the best solution to the client? Little consideration is given during the planning stage to investigate alternate solutions and innovative ideas when budgets are limited. Often what happens is that consultants put out stock standard designs that requires minimal effort. Then during or after implementation, the gaps become apparent. And this is what the public see. And that's when the questions start coming forward. And you often see the public putting forward solutions that should have been picked up by engineers. And this somehow creates a very negative view towards engineers as well. The second aspect that talks to value of money is when budgets are at stake and the costs, then consultants end up reducing the involvement of experienced personnel. And this gives rise to even greater gaps in the designs and leads on to more critical aspects of quality being compromised, legal implications, delays and penalties that can come on afterwards. And then this just adds up to a whole lot of more costs that come towards the consultants. And then the biggest thing I think that affects the consultants more specifically is business sustainability. If consultants tender at rates lower than the cost to undertake such work, as is evident in recent years, how then is the cost recuperated? Often it's at the expense of staff, either having to work longer hours to cover their cost or having salaries way below market value. But even then, that's not sustainable. Eventually, businesses will be forced to close their doors. While maybe larger firms can possibly continue longer and sustain themselves with international work and larger private clients, many smaller firms do not have these options. And inevitably, low pricing erodes away at the profit. Therefore, pricing lower than the previous fee scales should not even be an option, unless for some reason you can justify that you are able to still achieve that end goal with the lower price. Then looking at the impact on economic development. Limited thought given to optimum solutions during the planning stage generally results in limited consideration towards life cycle costing, which in turn increases operations and maintenance, and this means higher budgets allocated to O&M. And that's taking away from allocations that could be made to other critical factors. Secondly, lack of innovation. We as engineers are responsible for the upliftment of communities through our design. And lack of innovation means that we are allowing our economy, our communities to lag behind the rest of the world. And with lower fees coming into play, generally, most consultants don't have the budget or the time to put in that additional thought for innovation. Thirdly, lack of consideration given to environmental and social aspects during the design and implementation stage. This is also definitely something that has a ripple effect and creates a negative attitude towards engineers as well, and eventually creates deterioration and devaluation of the profession itself. And fourthly, engineering professionals leaving the country. This, I think, we've all seen taking place. Most engineers become engineers because they enjoy the challenge, they're passionate about trying to find new solutions. And when that challenge is taken away and we basically just basically instructed to produce stock standard designs, then they start feeling disillusioned, and accompanied with the fact that the salaries may not always be keeping up with the effort that they put in. It's definitely very disillusioning. And so that's why some of the engineering professionals are leaving the country. So the low fees are not just affecting the engineering consultants, but also the overall industry and the economy. The urgent need here is for us as professional consultants, to develop our ability to price professional services competitively and still being able to give the quality and due diligence that is required from us as engineers. And also for clients to structure an appropriate procurement environment to solicit competitive tender offers while still keeping in mind that the necessary experiences and competencies are in place. Many countries use the bottom-up approach. This approach considers the actual cost to complete the project, with the appropriately skilled individuals involved at the right levels. This approach is good, but can be a bit time and cost consuming, especially for smaller firms tendering and need to develop these mechanisms to price. Also from the client's perspective, the client needs to fully understand the value coming through for the fees presented. So the fee scale still has value, but we do need to give a bit more thought on how best to approach this issue, which has tremendous implications. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi, for your presentation and those insights you shared. Some really important points that you shared that we need to think about as we go through today's webinar. Next up, we have Professor Jean Wiem from Stellenbosch University. He will unpack the impact of discounted professional fees on the risk exposure of civil and structural engineering services consultants in South Africa, and he will be giving the public sector perspective.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Nombulelo, for the introduction, and thank you to CESA for the invitation to participate in this event. Just some background as to why we are here, why I'm here today. Some years ago, my master's student, Patrick Okonkwo, today Dr. Patrick, and I just embarked on a study to see what the impact would be of discounted fees on consultants, and therefore some feedback on that today. Further to that, my colleague Chris Jurgens, also with his student Karen Meyer from Zutari, looked at the risks of consultants involved in design build projects, and some of the work that they did also touched upon reduction in fees and the impact of that. So some of the information that I'll be sharing will be coming from that as well. And then other studies that we've been involved in here locally at the university, our department looks at a variety of items that also impact on some of these items that I will be drawing from and that I will be highlighting. And as you can see, some of those relate to safety of construction practices, the role of the designer in constructability, the use of building information models in constructability, and then some technologies to improve construction quality monitoring. We look at professional fees today, and for me, there's actually three levels to look at. There's the organizational impact, and if I say organization, I'm specifically referring to the consultants organization and the contractors organization. But there's also the project impact, and so for the project, there's the project for both the consultants and the contractor, but then also the project for the client, which has a bigger societal impact. So I will try to address those first two items, and then Patrick will specifically touch more upon the last one that shows the impact on society. As we all know, and Naomi also touched upon that, is that professional engineering services requires of a professional to provide a professional service. And apart from all the technical solutions that we actually need to provide, there's a host of other items that go hand in hand with that. And that would include finding sustainable solutions, and options to implement construction projects safely, but also for the long-term operation of the facilities. We need to provide value for money for the client. We need to answer the client's needs. The society or the community has got certain expectations that we need to look at. We need to comply with regulatory requirements. And ultimately, consultants also want to make a profit. And all of these items just add on to the services that need to be provided. And some of those then, as we've seen with Naomi's presentation, also lack when we have a lacking in fees. I want to look at the topic of project risk. Now, Roger Flanagan is a professor at the University of Reading in the UK. He's also well known in construction circles. He was a board member of Marion Roberts, and he's still also a member of the board of Skanska, which is one of the largest construction companies in Sweden. They operate extensively international. But Roger Flanagan and his student spoke about risk, and they said construction projects have an abundance of it. Contractors cope with it, and owners pay for it. Now, I quite like that statement because I think it also applies to the relationship between clients and consultants. So we know that by reducing a consultant's fee, more risk is placed on the consultant and ultimately on the project. So the client pays for it elsewhere, maybe in the final project cost, or in operational cost, or in maintenance cost. And the big problem is, can this be proven? And do clients really realize this? Now, I will touch upon this and trying to make a proposal right at the end of my presentation to come back to these items. We're still talking about risk then. There's basically the three parties that participate in a project. There's the client or the owner, then the consultant and the contractor. And we know there's a host of other participants in the supply chain, but nevertheless, each one of these sit with their own risk. And often they create risk for others. And in the same way, they can also help to reduce risk for others. Now, if we look at the contractor, Werner Gerling, who's the CEO of ASLA, and he used to be the MD of Stefanutti Stocks Civils. He did a study in 2008 for his master's studies, and he looked at the risks of contractors. And amongst the risks that contractors face, he paid quite some attention to the risk created by consultants. And one of those is the quality of documentation, which he found from a survey of about 60 high-level contractors, that consultants' documentation create quite a high risk for contractors. And further to that, the designs also impact on safety during execution, but also ultimately during maintenance. And then when consultants neglect aspects of constructability, it leads to unsafe practices, and it leads to impact on cost, quality, and program ultimately. But it was not only Werner Gerling that did those type of studies. There's a host of other researchers that looked at risks created on construction as a result of designs. And I'm not going to go through each one of these items, but I think there's enough evidence here to come back to Roger Flanagan's statement that construction projects have an abundance of risk, and contractors cope with it and owners pay for it. So by reduced scope of reduced fees, consultants create more and more risk on contractors. And what I'm trying to allude to is that ultimately it comes down to the client that will pay for that. Coming back to a consultant's risk, in our study some years ago, we looked at the impact of discounted fees, and Naomi highlighted some of those. Here, maybe we've got the proof of that on an academic level. In the study, we consulted quite a number of consultants, asked them questions and they gave feedback. And as I said earlier on, we looked at the consultant's project risk, the consultant's organizational risk, and then ultimately the project risk for the client and the owner. So in the next 2-3 slides, I'm going to give some of those feedback. So the first one, consultant project risk. So that is the project in the consultant's office and the impact on that, as we can see ranked here from 1 to 8, the different impacts. Now I'm not going to speak through each one of them, but you see the financial loss in the project in the consultant's office, and I think that is the most important, probably from a consultant's point of view, not necessarily from a society point of view. But you also see further down the list the poor quality of design and documentation, etc. Then for the consultant's organization itself, for the office, there's also risks that Naomi also mentioned, the ability to train and mentor young engineers, motivation of staff, relationships with clients, and several of these items come up every time that we speak about reduced fees. Also, we asked the consultants to give comment in general, and we captured quite a number of risks that I listed here. But what I did, I tried to categorize them, as you see on the right-hand side. Now, over there, you can see the impact on the company, or the company and society, but then in pinkish color there with a star, when I say project, I also mean actually impacting on the client. So it's a project client impact. I'm not going to talk through all of them, but you can see quite a number of items there listed where the impact is not only on the consultant, but also on the project and on the client, and ultimately then on the bigger industry environment. And items such as design errors, poor quality of documentation, absence of innovation, all play a role to reduce actually the service that the client would like to receive. I said that another study looked at design build projects and the risks that consultants have in that. One of the items that came up was also that consultants in design build projects often settle for lower fees. And the question was, how do they cope with that? What do they do as a remedy for low fees? And so once again, quite a list of items. I highlighted in red there the ones that have more of an impact on the client and ultimately on the final project. And as you can see, avoiding innovative ideas, negotiating a reduced scope of service, charging inflated prices for variations, and doing jobs which are repetitive without innovation and creativity. So ultimately, the project suffers and society suffers. Other research that I've looked at is work done by Ron Watermeyer and Sam Laraya at WITS. They're involved in framework agreements at both WITS and some of the newer universities. And they highlighted the benefits of early contractor involvement. And with early contractor involvement, there's real benefits for the project on project cost, on project scheduling and program, constructability, safety, and so on. And by allowing better time and better fees on any project, these type of benefits can be achieved if consultants have enough time to spend on that. If not, these items surely suffer some negative impact. So right at the end, I would like to say, now, so what? You know, we've been talking about low fees for several years, and every time we talk to each other and say, oh, this is bad and this is not good for neither the consultant nor the contractor nor the country, but we never move forward. So I say, while we've been able to highlight all the negatives of discounted fees, I ask myself, what is the impact on the consultant? So we've listed some of that. But who really cares? The consultants care. And somebody says, but you know, that's their problem. Same applies to the contractor. You know, who cares about them? It's the contractor's problem. But ultimately, it impacts the project and ultimately also the client. And doing that, it also impacts on society, on the country as a whole. So what I would like to advocate is that we really start doing something about this. And we can only do this if we've got evidence of this. So I'm saying evidence is needed to convince clients and ourselves, professionals, that discounted fees is not in everybody's interest. And therefore, we need to build a case which can prove the impact of full fees versus discounted fees. And therefore, we must prepare some historical data of these impacts. Now, historical, I say that is the past. But if we start today, we can build up a database of information from where we can track impact and trends. We can identify the leading parameters. And by using some of the newer techniques in data sciences, we can find the relationships and identify where the real problem is. But we will also be able to show to clients and to ourselves what the implication is. So my motivation, I think, this stands there. And the reason why we need to do that is to have information so that we've got a base to stand on. So such a database of information could consist of quite a large number of things. I just listed a few items, but surely a well configured program would decide on this. But one could, for example, capture the type of project, the type of procurement, a project estimate, the tender sum, the final project sum, professional fees, and items on duration, final duration, safety, maintenance, etc. And it would not be too difficult on a web-based system to capture this type of information for CESA members and do that over the next 2 or 3, 4, 5 years, and this database can just build and build. Ultimately, there are some questions. Who will be the owner of such database? Now, it could be CESA, it could be EXA, it could be CIDB, even Treasury. Maybe Patrick or Concours will say a few words about that. But then other questions that come up would be, what would be the format of such a database? Who would be responsible for capturing it, monitoring it, reporting? I'm sure all of those are items that can be answered and that can be thrashed out. So I'm convinced there's sufficient evidence, and we keep on saying that for ourselves, that discounted professional fees have negative impacts on project participants, but it also impacts on society who bear the cost of public projects. Clients ultimately need to realize that risk and cost cannot be removed from a project. And if they save on professional fees, they will ultimately pay the price, whether it's during execution or maintenance that will come. So as a profession, we need to resist discounting professional fees because it will ultimately be good for society and for the country as a whole. But we can only do that if we capture evidence of the impact to convince our peers and our clients of that. And then I say an action is needed to some organization, it could be CESA, it could be EXA, to address this damaging practice. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for sharing your insights. You've made some great points. I think we can all be in agreement that the Professor and Naomi are in agreement with regards to discounted professional fees. It's time now to hear from you as we launch our first poll, which will pop up on your screen shortly. Do you believe discounted professional fees by engineers have an impact on the quality of work? Yes, no, or maybe. We'll give you 20 seconds to vote on this as we run the poll. All right, it seems 90% of people are voting yes so far, and some people are still on the no and the maybe, but we've just closed our poll, and the results are in, and you guys have said that you do believe, yes, you do believe that discounted professional fees by engineers have an impact on the quality of work. Professor William, are you shocked at the poll results, or was this expected?
Yeah, Nombolelo, thank you. I don't think I'm really shocked. I mean, I think we've heard from Naomi and from our own research that this is, what we see from feedback from the profession and from all research that we see, that there's certainly an impact of quality on quality of work. So I think, and that is why I say I think we need to take this a step further. I think we're all aware of this. There seem to be a few no's and a few maybes, but I think, yeah, we need to take it a step further. But thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor, for sharing your insights on that poll. Up next to talk about the impact of discounted professional fees on the risk exposure of civil contractors in South Africa. From the private sector side, we have Dr. Patrick Okonkwo, whom the professor has kind of introduced so well. He's a researcher and contractor from 333 Engineering.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here. And I would like to thank the presenters before me. Naomi, she has traced the history of the problem right up to the Competition Commission's ruling, and Professor VM has presented a good picture of the risk associated with the practice. So this presents a good segue into my presentation. So in my presentation, I will be interrogating the reasons for discounting from the perspective of the private sector. I'll be sharing my perspective on the consequences for consulting engineers and implications for contractors and the public. And then I'll recommend what I believe is a path to addressing the challenge within the bounds of prevailing constraints. So let's begin. The topic for this webinar, it says building a capable state requires the calculation and payment of reasonable professional fees. The word reasonable jumps out at me, and if you check the dictionary, the word reasonable connotes appropriate, it connotes fair, it connotes not excessive. So the current EXA fee scale, I think I would like to say that fee scale is a product of industry consensus by EXA, and it's in the public interest, and it's competitive. So in that sense, the fee scale is reasonable, it's fair, and it's not excessive. So any attempts at discounting does the opposite. So what are the ranges of discounts? The average is 20 to 30%. That's the norm. In extreme conditions, you can have discounts up to 70%. The presentations by the two panelists before me has already demonstrated that excessive discounts compromises quality of service, because the price point at which the service is delivered is such that it's difficult to allocate adequate resources and time to delivering a good enough service. Excessive discount as a business practice, in my opinion, borders on unethical practices. So what are the factors driving discounting? When dealing with private clients, I think it's market pressure and clients request discounts. I'll go as far as arguing that that the fee scale from EXA has become a tool in the hands of clients to demand this discounts. And when dealing with public clients, it's the procurement regulations, quality and cost-based selection, but tender evaluation is the rule. And for me, there's also a third component. I think it's the inability of the consulting engineering industry to adequately communicate the value of its service to clients in terms of risk and return on investment. The consulting engineering service is still seen as part of the cost within the budget of the wider project that needs to be managed and accommodated. So I'd like to just make a comparison between the consulting engineering professionals who operate in the AEC space, and by AEC I mean the architecture, engineering, and construction space, and other professionals like the doctors and like the business consultants. The value of the doctor's service is self-evident. It's in your health, and in most cases, it's a life and death situation. So you don't have the luxury of negotiating fees with them. With the business consultants, they're able to show or situate the value of the service in terms of your bottom line, in terms of profitability, in terms of efficiency to your business. So at the end of the day, it's not a grudge payment. They show you what they deliver, and this is their fee for that service. Another aspect to it is the domestic economy, market pressure. If you observe closely, you'll find that there's an inverse relationship between the intensity of discounting and the availability of work in the industry. So the more available work is, the less intense discounting is, and the vice versa. So one good indicator of the availability of work or the demand for consulting engineering services is something called gross fixed capital formation. Gross fixed capital formation is a component of GDP that represents it measures the amount of resources in the GDP of a country that is allocated or that is spent on producing fixed assets, such as infrastructure, plants, equipment. So according to the International Federation of Consulting Engineers, FIDIC, 54% of activities that are financed using gross fixed capital formation of a country go as activities that require the services of a consulting engineer. That's the global average. And of that amount, 8% constitutes revenue to the consulting engineering industry. So what is the South African context? Are we above or are we below this global average? CESA publishes this biannual economic capacity survey reports, and in that report there's a section dedicated to gross fixed capital formation, but the report doesn't go far enough because it's based on a survey of respondents, consulting engineering firms, on the average about 30-40 respondents in some of the surveys that I've seen. And if you look at that report, if you go through those reports, you can begin to see that since 2015, consulting engineering gross fixed capital formation in South Africa has been on the decline. So I decided to just paint a picture and try to compare South Africa, the reality in South Africa, with the rest of the BRICS countries: Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and then the United States. And this table for 2021, which is the last available year with complete data, you can see on the third column that South Africa gross fixed capital formation in South Africa only accounts for 13% of GDP. Compared to the other countries, China is up there very high, and Brazil, and so, and if you look at the South African GDP, it's actually relatively smaller compared to these other countries. And we must keep in mind that gross fixed capital formation is a very important component of GDP that powers growth and development. By this table and using the global average, the civil, structural, or the AEC component of the construction industry should earn about $2.45 billion as of 2021. And Rand's value, that should be about 43 billion rands. I didn't find any evidence to suggest that the industry earned that much in that year. So this is a part of a challenge, and I'll get to it later. So the impact of discounted fees for consulting engineers, I think Prof has done justice to this, and I just need to highlight a few things that are pertinent to the contractors. High up in that ranking of the risk is poor quality design and documentation, the ability to train and mentor young engineers, and the ability to hire and retain highly qualified staff. So what's the implication of this for the civil contractor, for contractors generally? Quality and design documentation. It's either documents that information is late, information is missing, or information is incorrect. The absence of value engineering. This increases the whole cost of the project for the client. Where you have instances where even contractors can look at the design solution and think, I can actually provide to the client a more cost-effective solution. Then there's the issue of constructability. What is the implication of your design for the safety of my team and for my costs? All of this, or the three of them, contribute to an adversarial relationship and conflict on projects, because clients ultimately will pay for this risk, and the contractor has to cope with this risk. It's either you have to cope with it from your reworks, delays, or standing time, and all of this costs money. And it's inimical to collaboration on projects. So overall, this negatively impacts the projects in terms of costs and time objectives. So what's the implication for the country? I think we must all understand that you get what you pay for. The information or service provided by the consulting engineer at the onset of the project life cycle, at the planning and design stage, is critical for overall project success down for the other stages of the life cycle of the project. I think we must understand this. Then also is the inability to extract maximum value from already low gross fixed capital formation. How much value is the country extracting from what we spend on infrastructure? Are we getting maximum utility for every dollar we spend, or are we wasting our money? Next is a shortage of skill. It's important to state that South African universities train good quality engineers, and these engineers are able to operate and move to environments where their services are better remunerated. So skilled and experienced engineers, professional engineers are leaving the market. And the ability to recruit and train young engineers is also becoming impacted, because you need that pool of young engineers to sustain the industry. So overall, this impacts growth and development of the country. So in conclusion, I think the impact of discounting on projects risk is yet to be convincingly demonstrated to clients. We haven't made a good argument in terms of numbers and data to clients. Effectively communicating this risk to clients requires data currently not aggregated. Obviously, clients and contractors are impacted by risk accentuated by discounted fees, but this risk needs to be measured and it needs to be quantified to make a very good argument. So as a recommendation, within the constraints of the economic realities of the country and the Competition Commission ruling, advocacy and education of clients is the path to addressing this challenge. I think we need to, like Prof has suggested, and which I completely agree with, we need to keep the data, and with data analytics and the power of data today, I think we can quantify, measure, and show the relationships between all of these issues. So similar to the occupational health and safety requirement, where projects above a certain threshold are required to make certain reports to the Labor Department, I think a similar framework should be put in place in line with what Prof has suggested. This data can be added to already existing reporting requirements and just collected, and people at the universities like Professor VM can do some work trying to demonstrate the value of the consulting engineering industry to clients and to the general public. And this ends my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for your presentation. I think what stood out, mostly from what you've said, you get what you pay for, and there seems to be an agreement between the professor, the doctor, and Naomi with regards to discounted fees. As before we launch the second poll, we do see your questions coming in and we are noting them. Please do note that Chris Campbell, the CEO of CESA, will be joining us for the panel discussion. So we will definitely be posing some of those questions to him. So please do keep them coming. We'll now launch the second poll, which asks you, should the state approach a best value for money approach, or should projects go to the lowest bidder? We'll give you 20 seconds again to answer that poll question, and then we will bring up those results. All right, thank you so much everyone for voting. I see an overwhelming number of people are saying yes, the state should approach a best value for money approach, but I see also there's 10% of people who are saying that projects should go to the lowest bidder. I don't know, Professor, what do you, Doctor, what do you think with regards to the results? Are you surprised at all at the amount of people who have voted yes?
Well, my answer will be a bit more nuanced. It's not a straightforward yes or no. I think with the professional fee scale, we should bear in mind that quality-based selection is already the law in some countries. With the fee scale in place, I think I agree with the poll. If the reverse is the case, I would say the fee scale should not feature, and consulting engineers should estimate their costs and then bid for projects like contractors, every other person does.
Great, thank you so much for sharing your insights on your presentation, and also sharing your insights on the poll. And thank you so much for all of our viewers for voting. We will now have Trevor Matabata, who's the Chief Engineer at the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. He will be joining us telephonically, so please do bear with us if we do experience some technical issues. He will be unpacking consultant fees, giving a guideline for public works professionals. Hi, Trevor.
Good day. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Thank you. My presentation is somewhat slightly different to the theme. I thought maybe I should provide a background to how we got to where we are, where the Department of Public Works is publishing its fees, also while EXA is also publishing its own fees. So I think the fees that the department is publishing is for professionals that are doing work for the department, and it's not meant to replace the fees published by EXA. Next slide. So this is just a table of contents for what I'll be presenting. I'll just provide the background and brief history of the fees, and then I'll move to the publication of the fee guidelines. Then I'll move to the fee calculators that have been developed by the department. Next slide, please. Okay. So back in the day, before some of us started practicing, the fees were the duties of the Minister of Community Development, which is equivalent to the present day Public Works, and they were being published in line with the Professional Engineers Act 81 of 1968. Obviously, that has now been repealed and replaced with the Engineering Act. And this schedule of fees was published after the minister consulted with SACPE, which is the South African Council of Professional Engineers, and the present day EXA. And it was published in a government notice R1113. And this notice was issued every year up until 2002. Next slide, please. So when the Engineering Act of 2000 came into effect, the mandate then moved from the Minister of DPW to EXA through the provisions in the Act of Section 34(2) of the Act. And EXA then formed a fees committee and then on the fees committee, the voluntary associations, the public and private sector clients were all represented on this committee, including the department through one of its registered engineers. And the fees published by EXA followed the same format of the notice R1113 as previously published by the minister. Next slide, please. So, because the EXA fees were published after consultation with multiple parties, not all the needs of the department were catered for in the EXA fees. So it's on this basis that the department then adapted the fees to suit its operations. So this fundamentally means that the department had fees that sort of seem similar to EXA, but if you dig deeper into the particularly the scope of services rendered, the deliverables per stage, you'll see that there's a fundamental differences in what the department requires in a certain stage versus what the EXA fees are saying. So in 2013, that's when EXA took a decision to amend the format of determining fees. So adopting a format that provided for negotiated fees and in a much wider scale and on an open basis, taking specific requirements of projects into account. However, the department was of the view that the fee scale as they were originally in the notice R1113 was still sufficient for the department's operations, and wanted to keep it that way. So on that basis, then the schedule of fees between EXA and the department started being different. So the department continued on the old format and EXA the new proposed format. So that is the background to where we are, where the department seems to be using the older format of the fee guidelines, and the EXA is providing excess fees are slightly different in that they allow for negotiation of fees. Next slide, please. So the methodology for delivery for determining these fees obviously is based on the experience the department has in most of its projects. So it's basically to try to suit their operational needs and to try to curb some risks that they foresee if the department adopts the EXA fees as they are. So like I said when I started, the difference is fundamentally in the delivery, in the project life cycles, and also in how we pay for the disbursements and such. But because the department, when it's issuing the tender documents, they come together with contract data, and on that contract data they try to amend some of the shortcomings of the fees. So some of those amendments found their ways into the tariff for fees that are published by the department, and some of them didn't. But yeah, the format is still the same as it was previously published by the minister, and the fees are published every year, and they are available on the departmental's website. So if you go to the next slide, please. Yes, so the fee calculators that are published, so the department developed fee calculators to assist the appointed consultants when they are claiming for their fees. So depending on what stage the consultant is at, if you populate the construction value, whether it's the actual construction value or the estimated, then the calculators work out what fees are due to you. Unfortunately, the fee calculators do not capture the discount, because the discount is captured.
Apologies to our viewers. We seem to be experiencing a bit of technical difficulty there. Are working on it to get Trevor back with us. So please do give it a moment. It might be load shedding where he is, so it might be giving us a bit of issues. While we wait for him to come back online, I'd like to please remind you that we do have the CESA CEO with us, who will be able to kind of answer some questions with regards to the questions that you have sent through in the poll discussion and in the question section. So I would like to, for the moment, skip ahead and introduce our next speaker, and we'll get Trevor back for the panel discussion with us. So I'd like to introduce our last speaker, last but definitely not least, Uzair Osman. He's the CESA YPF Vice Chairperson, and he's also a candidate engineer at Bosch Projects. He will talk about the impact of reasonable engineering fees on the skills pipeline.
Thank you so much. You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. All right, so I've been tasked to talk about the effects of basically discounting on our industry. And without a skills pipeline, there won't be an industry. So I thought this was sort of a fundamental foundation to, the people are the industry. I think the first thing is I want to make clear that my aim here is to expose the impacts and not to sort of be a big dreary negative cloud hanging over and sort of chase everybody, especially youth that might be watching at the moment, young engineers, away from the industry. And the reason why we want to address this is so that we can then look at acting on these and correcting these impacts. Some of my speakers today have properly given, with deep research and first-hand knowledge about the effects. I think this is specifically on the, the people. So let me get through. So first thing, with regards to the pipeline, what is a skills pipeline? Basically, it's the flow of people through basically a life stage from entering school straight through becoming a candidate, becoming a graduate, becoming a candidate, and then a professional, and up to retirement. This basically just articulates it in a nice form, nice picture form. But I think I'll be discussing each individual portion of this and how fees affects each member at each cycle. I think the few things to note is that we do have a lot of leaks in this pipeline, and normally that's a natural thing. But I think what seems to be an unnatural thing is that people are leaving, and there's not as many people joining. If you get what I'm saying, no one else decides to become an engineer just after becoming a doctor or a lawyer or businessman. But the reverse is always true. I think just to ponder that for a second. Yeah, and obviously without no pipeline, there are no professional engineers. Okay. All right, so the next thing I want to discuss is why is it important to maintain the pipeline? Now, obviously, if we have two pipelines that one has a fully fledged flowing professionals running through the system and one that does not, well, the clear first indication is that if we don't maintain it, the quality of the PR engineers drastically reduce. I mean, that's sort of just an obvious thing, because the amount of people that were willing to do that much of effort to get there or to stay tend to move away. So, as also alluded to some of my speakers before. Obviously, and then also people that are attracted to the industry are not in quantity as it used to be, and thus we don't get the best people in. And this has happened in other industries as well, but I prefer not to bring them up. Ultimately, as Professor mentioned, it affects the clients if the quality goes down. Okay, now, so I did mention I was going to go through each individual, and this is specifically the school phase. And the school phase, I would like to first share that CESA has certain initiatives that go out to do shadowing as well as maths workshops and tuition in certain regions. And while doing those and being exposed to kids, the first thing they ask is, what do engineers earn? So we have to smile to each other and tell them, listen, if you really want to become rich, you probably shouldn't become an engineer, but you will be comfortable, not rich, but comfortable. And how many of those kids do you think would be interested in engineering after that? Or the parents maybe encourage them to be engineers? I was told the same thing when I became an engineer. And yeah, I don't think we too far from the truth there. So coming back to my topic of school, and I think starting from the primary phase, if we don't have people from the industry going to schools and talking to the kids about, this is who I am, and this is what I do, and this is what you need to do to get there, then the kids won't choose science or know that they have to make an effort towards it, so they can choose it in grade 10 and then do well, so that they can make it into university and be able to become engineers. Also, how many? I don't think many of our organizations do this, and I mean, we can point to the fees as being it, because we don't have budget to go and do this. CESA try, but obviously, we've got to help out CESA as well in sponsorship and so on. So moving on from there, we have kids that, I actually challenge you to go and find schools that actually do maths and science at grade 10 level, because I've done this exercise, gone out and try to call kids in certain areas, trying to find schools that do maths and science in grade 10. It was a very difficult process, mainly because people just don't choose, especially in rural areas, don't choose maths and science as a subject. This means that it's a very leaky pipeline from the offset. We do need to market engineers, engineering as a profession. We are going to suffer, and the engineers are going to suffer, and the clients will suffer if this trajectory continues. Okay, so I think I'm going to the next section. And then, okay, after maybe you're able to choose maybe you choose the right subjects, maybe you do well, those select few, I think about 2% of kids are able to get in, if I'm correct. And then let's say they get there, and what ends up happening is that they choose to study engineering, and then obviously, do we, as in the industry, provide enough bursaries? I mean, I don't think we do, because obviously fees are, where are you going to get the budget? The first things that cut are usually training and bursary and extracurriculars. So we do need fees, obviously, to generate these things, to give bursaries. Why? Because kids or students, new graduate students that have joined, they need, I've seen so many that have obviously left after the first semester, mainly because they've decided, okay, this is not my path, but some because they don't have the funding. They had to go back home. It's no more money. I mean, that happened to my dad, and it's not a good thing. Not for engineering, but yeah, it happened to my dad. This, the amount of kids that also, need grants to study further, such as master's degrees and so on. The funding that comes to universities is from grants, a major part of it as well. And we don't have the budget to do R&D. How much of our, company, we as companies say we do innovative companies, but how do we innovate? We can't just think of an idea and implement it. We have to test it. To actually test it, these universities do it, and we need to give grants to get these testing across. A lot of us cut R&D as maybe our first or second thing to cut when our engineering fees go down and we don't have the budget. This again impacts clients because you don't have the right solution applied, because you don't have money to pay for the R&D. And without grants and things like that, I wouldn't be able to study further. And I think a professor and doctor would probably agree with me. Okay, so the next phase obviously is an employment. You've now maybe you managed to graduate, you've managed to go over your financial hurdles, and then you're sitting for a job. And how many people have we seen on LinkedIn or Facebook, holding up these things? I am summa cum laude with MSc or doctoral in some science, and please help me find a job. It seems that we have, a big demand for engineers, but not employing too many of them. It's a very interesting thing. You could wait, you could be graduate from engineering and then wait for a year and then somehow maybe find a job in an alternate industry, and stay there for the rest of your career. And this has happened to my brother, who's also an engineer. So it's something that is happening. Okay, and then the next phase is obviously the candidate phase. You manage to get through that phase where you get employed. You obviously started, matriculated well, you got through campus, financial hurdles, and then you managed to find a job. And then, well, how's the salary now? Oh no, you're just a candidate, you're just a internship phase. You kind of have to make do. Some people have even told me the story where they have had to work for free just so they can get an opportunity in the company, which or they had to work at a loss, depending on the situation. Listen, guys, black tax is real. Okay, we have to fork out things to our family who can't make it sometimes, and we sometimes have to move into new cities and things like that. It's very costly, and we have to make a loss just to work. And as a thinking of that idea of what's happening is, I don't think that's acceptable at any level, that we at employees that have to run at a loss in order to sort of get to where they're going. And the employers do that. Why? There's no budget to maybe train people or to hire people to develop people from youth. And that directly is impacted by these. These are university and technical university sort of graduates, and obviously they should be paid at least to the fact that they don't make a loss while trying to go through the system, and you're being employed now to do actual work. Okay. And so at the first slide there was two methods there, the push and pull method. And obviously there are a lot of companies out there looking to hire the finished product and not trying to develop their own. And obviously because they don't have maybe it's cheaper to do that. You can rather pay a higher salary than to train guys for a couple of years below trying to fit into jobs. But can you imagine the results of that? I mean, if everyone just started using the pull method and not the push method, there would be no one to employ because there's no one there that has been trained. Okay, so the next phase, the mentor phase and the mentee phase. Obviously, you need mentoring and you need a mentor. And what are the effects, obviously? Well, I think I would like to start first with the mentor and we have senior engineers that sometimes get told, no, you can't book all your time to this project because there's no budget in the project for it. I mean, then, does that really make sense? You don't have enough time to do the job that the project requires. So we don't even have time for that. And then we want to say, okay, but now you have to mentor someone on top of that. So where's that budget going to come from? Where's that time going to come from? Obviously we need mentors. We need seniors to nurture us through that phase. And there's so much that can be learned. And if there isn't, I mean, obviously the mentor thinks, okay, what am I doing here? Or the senior engineer thinks, what am I doing here? I don't even get paid for the money, the time that I put in. And he could shift away. And if he shifts away, then there's no one to train our younger people. And obviously the effects of our mentees that are becoming senior, therefore end up being less of a quality than we would originally have hoped, because there's no one to nurture them through. Okay, so a lot, and I think also the effects on young people coming into the industry. They're bright-faced and bushy-tailed and energetic, and we need that energy. It's our legs of our industry. They see the situation, and I'm sure they get disillusioned or disheartened, and I think people have mentioned this before. And this is not a good thing, because if you if you have that energy taken out, the culture changes, the approach entirely changes, the quality obviously is non-existent thereafter. Okay, so I think it's a very important aspect just to maintain the industry for that. Now I would like to go now after I move out the phases to understand what CESA provides for, and it's somewhat kind of it for each of these things that CESA does. Obviously they help with maths and science that through various little initiatives. They obviously propagate engineering and professionalism and consulting excellence. CPD there's always programs for that. Transformation is a big part, and obviously they push for reasonable fees that supplement all of this, and they look to grow people and the skills pipeline. But if the capacity of CESA was to do all this, and we don't have own capacity in our companies, we need to introduce it. If not, like CESA can't do everything, and also they don't get enough funding. So that's another story. We can't fund our volunteer organizations if we don't get enough fees. So that hopes to go. So I'd like to conclude, and something obviously has to give. We can't have a blocks and leaking engineering skills pipeline. That's going to end disastrous. The quality of the engineering cannot be compromised for safety and and for the client's well-being. The fewer we can't have fewer bursary opportunities. Otherwise we end up with obviously a blocked skills pipeline. That also affects the transformation because we aren't able to introduce and transform the engineering industry. Inadequate number of workplace training and service opportunities obviously are cut because it's the first thing that tends to get cut for budgets, and obviously the limited career awareness amongst general public, which doesn't help our pipeline as well. So all of these are not good for the clients and the country. I know it's a bleak output. That's not my objective. It's just sort of we have to put it out there, and we need to convince engineers not to leave because we need to change something. And I don't know which comes first. If we convince them to stay first and then have the change, and hopefully they stay for that. But the clients would have to come to the table. I don't think, I mean, what the alternative would be that, we do it for ourselves. But I think that's borderline, could be borderline very, very big trouble. But we could see that, and hopefully we are able to convince clients of our value. And of course if we need to market better, and I hope that helps. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Uzair, for your presentation, kind of ending it there for us on a bit of a somber but yet realistic mode. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for sharing their insights and kind of sharing their presentations. We will now be proceeding to the panel discussion. I'd like to ask all of our panelists to please switch their webcams on and also unmute themselves for this session. While they do that, just a quick reminder to all of our viewers to please submit questions you have for our speakers, which we will tackle at the end in our Q&A session. I'd also like to take this time to welcome Chris Campbell, who will be joining us. He's the CEO of CESA. He will be joining us for this session, and there are a couple of questions, Chris, that have come through that I think you would be suitable to answer. So, but the first question for our panel, one of the poll questions kind of asked whether the state should approach a best value for money approach, or should projects go to the lowest bidder? I'd like to kind of get your views on what the state's criteria should be for selecting consulting engineers or other built environment professionals. Should it be based on the lowest price method, or combination of quality and lowest prices? Jan, I'd like to give that one to you first.
Yeah, I think the easy answer is yes, we would like value of money rather than lowest price. The challenge is, however, how to determine that. So if you need to make a choice between consultants with tenders where they submit a price and then indication of their experience and quality that they can maintain, very challenging to determine the latter one. And therefore, I think what is needed actually in some environments we do have that, in some environments we don't have that, is the need for a knowledgeable client. Because once you've got a knowledgeable client, they can obviously judge that quality and the scope and the experience much better. It is not always easy to judge the experience just by getting a CV of a company. So knowledgeable clients, I think, is something that we must really work on. And with the capacity shortage that we've got in many environments, that really remains something to solve. But the other thing I think that is also needed is and I think the standard scope documents that we've got both from EXPA and departments of public works and so on, they give a scope of works. But I think to a large extent that should be even better defined, because I think that is where it leaves room for interpretation and room for people to deliver less than what is really needed. So I think it goes hand in hand, scope definition and knowledgeable client. And then, yes, the answer is we want value of money, and we don't necessarily want just the lowest price.
True that. Thank you so much for that. I think we can all be, I think the entire panelists are in agreement with regards to the fact that the current fee model is not working effectively. Naomi, how can it be improved in your view? What needs work immediately? And then in the long term, what can we be looking to do?
Hi, thank you, Nambu. I think immediately one of the critical things that Jan brought up is being able to clearly define the scope of works. If that scope of works is clearly defined, then I think everybody is able to see, in order to accomplish this, this is what it entails, and this is the cost associated with it. So I think that's definitely an immediate a solution that needs to come into play, and clients need to be also possibly guided on that on how it needs to be put forward. In terms of the quality, that a lot of clients already have that in place, and there's when they go through the quality criteria, a number of firms pass through that with flying colors. But when it comes to implementation, that's where it starts falling short. So there needs to be some sort of check in place during the implementation stage to make sure that all these boxes are ticked. And if you've put forward specific resources or a specific plan that you plan to roll out for this project, there needs to be some sort of checks to make sure that that's happening at the different stages of the project. That's the only way to kind of like have a handle on the project, to make sure that we're not missing anything and there's no gaps that's coming through because of the low pricing. Because many times, although the resources and the experience of the company may be good, when it comes down to the implementation of it, then there's a lot of cutbacks in order for that project to fit within that budget. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Patrick, I think also from the private sector perspective and from the client perspective, I think Naomi and the professor gave us a great view of that. I think, what do you think from the private sector perspective? Is it more of a best value for money approach, or should the lowest bidder win? And where can we kind of immediately improve? And then going forward, what do we need to be looking out for in order to improve this model?
Well, in my view, there are merits to every option, and I think there are three issues that are at play here that contributes to this storm we have. First is the economy, the pressure on the economy, and that is reinforcing competition, and that has an impact on discounting. Second is we have fee scale. And in my opinion, that fee scale was developed with the public interest in mind. We need to establish that. Then third is, like Naomi has mentioned, not everyone who's able to demonstrate through proposals and documentation that they are competent, offers the best service. So what do we do with all of these three issues? And I would like to throw out an idea, and I don't have all the answers, but it's just something we can begin to think about and consider. Similar to the health practitioners, you have the insurance network, where you have a network of doctors who, if you are sick, you go to this doctor and you get a service. And the insurance company has a specified tariff which they apply across the network. Can we model something similar? I know this is radical, but it's just something we can begin to think about. The fee scale is there. If we agree that that fee scale was developed in the public interest, how do we use that fee scale in a way that the Competition Commission is happy? So can EXA and CESA play that role of that insurance network? And we also have the issue of capacity at our local municipalities. That's also a very important issue. Can we have EXA registered members who are pre-qualified, who EXA has a profile in terms of competence, number of employees they have, and all of that stuff, and EXA becomes the arbiter? I understand I discussed this with Prof. I think there was something similar to this in the past where EXA, you kind of hustle out this works. That deals with the issue of the economy, make sure that everybody is busy. I don't have all the answers, but these are just ideas that we can begin to think about. But on the whole, I think there are merits to everything. But my problem with the cost-based selection is that we have the fee scale. And that fee scale has become a tool in the hands of clients. Without the fee scale, I as a consulting engineer can estimate what my rates will be, independent of what every other person is charging. We operate like every other professional in the industry, and it operates truly as a market. But in this case, we have a fee scale, and like the man from the public works, he says they have a fee system in place. But I think listening to him, he also mentioned something like that fee scale also incorporates a discount. So it's an issue that we need to think outside of the box to deal with, keeping in mind the pressure from the economy, keeping in mind the need to keep our engineers and everything. I think that's my response to that.
Great, thank you so much. I think I'd like to throw this one to Chris, that we are getting a question also from our viewers. I'm kind of like looking at what is CESA doing? What is CESA's plan to kind of deal with what this problem is at the moment? Chris, I think you have muted yourself. If you could just unmute yourself, please.
Okay, thank you. And my apologies for that fishbowl analogy there. So I think what's crucial for us, I mean, let's take a few steps back here, and I can answer the question on what is CESA doing. Firstly, I think we have to be mindful of the fact that CESA as an organization is an industry association, cannot get intimately and directly involved in how those scales are published. Otherwise, we will have the Competition Commission on us, because of the risk of being perceived to be anti-competitive. But certainly we can share with EXA, we can share with client bodies, and even we're happy to do that with the Competition Commission to explain what is the risk of not having at least published fee guidelines owned and produced by a statutory body such as EXA, which is neutral and unbiased. And the reality we face, of course, is firstly, Prof. Wiem made a very pertinent point, the knowledgeable client. And CESA is doing a lot to try and assist our clients become more knowledgeable, so that they understand better what professional services ought to cost. I think for far too long, there's been this acceptance or assumption that I can pay rock bottom price and discount it further, but I'm going to get top quality service. That is counterintuitive. It's tantamount to going into a Mercedes-Benz dealership, seeing the latest C-Class there, and it's priced at the cost of a Beetle, a 1970s Beetle at that. You need to ask yourself the question, you know, do I believe that that is the correct pricing? And ask the question, not assume that you've done your job, now you can commission people because you've saved some money. The problem with that money saving, it's a short-term pursuit. We need to look at the total cost of ownership. And infrastructure is generally a 30 to 50 year, owned mostly in the public sector by government. So you need to look at how can I get the best information to develop infrastructure that's going to last me for that period with reasonable maintenance costs and intervals in between. You know, so a lot gets lost along the way. And I think certainly if we were to ask the question of why would we need fee guidelines published, is in a mature market where the clients are knowledgeable and the consulting firms are sticking to their guns, to use an expression, in respect of that is the requisite quality of service I can afford to offer you for that solution, and not compromise on that. Then maybe we don't need fee scales, because then there's an automatic healthy level and pattern. But in an immature market and environment, you unfortunately need that kind of guide. And I think that, you know, Patrick raised the issue of, if those fee scales are set, then there should be at least a minimum, the minimum bar. Minimum meaning you've taken into account that there's quality issues and all of the above, sustainability, cost of running a company, overheads, you name it. And much like the medical profession, we need to stick to that. I mean, can you imagine you ill? You go to one doctor's room and you ask, or you're asking several doctors to tender to help you with your health. And then who are you going to select? And yeah, the unfortunate reality as a society is people don't have enough understanding of the value that the engineering professional services bring, the lives that are saved and not put at risk by making sure that bridges stand up, that buildings don't collapse. But because there isn't an immediate impact, people are happy to accept that you can water down and commoditize those professional services and think that I can buy my professional service like I'm buying material at the Oriental Plaza and bargain for a discount. You know, so there's a lot that can be said, but I certainly think that from the CESA perspective, we certainly advocating the need for that. If there are questions around how do you measure value for money, and by the way, the new public procurement bill, which is now serving at Parliament, has value for money. It also has a differentiation in how you proceed with the procurement of infrastructure delivery, very different from general goods and services. So it is likely that the value proposition will have to be matched with the pricing so that it's constitutional, which says in section 217 of the Constitution, cost effective. Our Constitution never ever said least cost. So there is hope on the horizon, but I think more people need to be educated and buy into the need for this. I could ramble on for a very long time, but I'm gonna pause there. Thank you, Nombulelo.
Thank you so much. I think, Uzair, I'd like to kind of ask you this one. It's kind of a combination of a comment from one of our viewers and also what Chris has kind of shared. There seems to be kind of this in society, well, in South Africa, this bargaining kind of notion where if you buy something, you're going to bargain for it. You're going to want to get a discount for it. And as you all have discussed with regards to, there needs to be kind of a set framework and regulation with that. Can you kind of discuss, does that mindset that we carry as South Africans, I mean, also myself in certain situations, I found myself trying to bargain in many situations. And as you said, with the example you said with your doctor's fees, you don't bargain with your doctor's fees, but you'd rather bargain with engineers. Do you think that that mindset also plays a role individually when people are kind of discussing these discounted fees within the industry itself?
Thank you for that question. I think, as you know, when it comes to, it's a cultural thing. I've seen in certain places in different places in the world that people have a different approach to, you know, to these interactions. But yes, in our country specifically, especially when it comes to engineering fees, amongst private and public clients, there is this culture that comes around trying to find the lowest price. I've heard stories where there are even tenders that have gone out, and then the lowest price, then the client goes to the lowest price and then asks for a further discount on the lowest price in the third, which kind of, you know, I feel is undermining of the entire system. But it's I mean, we've seen it as it's actually maybe the whole thing is the people have been given an objective, and you've been seen to do a good job if you get something done under budget. Or to save money, or look how much money I've saved. And you know, but what Chris said before, you know, look how much money you spend for this certain thing, but then 2 years down the line, it's not functioning anymore. Or some of our other speakers have said it's not. Oh, your quote was perfect at the beginning, speaking about, you know, you can pay absolutely low prices for absolutely nothing, and that's what you get. So is it a thing that yes, it is definitely a thing that's a cultural thing, especially amongst our industry. The thing that we have to approach is we have to change the culture, maybe the approach to each individual. There was I mentioned earlier that we set, you know, this is how much you get for, this is how much you pay for. But there's also, you know, a lot of people don't perceive the value, they do perceive the lowest price. Okay, at least I know I'm not paying that much. If it fails, it fails, but at least I'm not paying more and it's failing, or I don't know what it was. But yeah, the business aptitude and approach to the whole thing is entirely different, especially when it comes to engineers. And I think as it continues, I'm not sure, there might be dire effects, or maybe it'll go into a reset where we become a scarce resource and the price really goes up. But I really hope it doesn't go there. I hope that we're able to, you know, apply the middle ground and find something constructive to do going forward. I hope to answer the question.
Yes, you did perfectly. I mean, before we move on to our third poll, I would like to read a comment from one of our viewers, and I kind of posed this question to Professor Jan. How should value for money be determined? There are many organizations with limited engineers to evaluate the quality submissions. There's also limited scope to discuss this between parties. Employers are very reluctant to make their evaluations public or discuss it post-tender with a view to improving future submissions. Currently, once you achieve a threshold of 60 to 70%, you qualify and tenders awarded on price. There is 30% variation in quality, probably high-end quality, which is not considered. So in that aspect, Terence kind of wants to know, how should value for money be determined? Professor, I think you have muted yourself there.
Thank you. Yeah, good question. I've got no idea how to find the exact answer, the right answer. I think it's a matter of a moving target. But I think I need to get back to a knowledgeable client. And I know that the person asking the question said not all clients or owners have the capability to judge that. But I think that may be wrong, because you may, as someone said, I don't know who said that exactly, but you may appoint somebody with good experience, with capability, capacity, and then even that appointee may not give you the service you want. So if you define clearly what you want, and you define clearly, ultimately you get a price for that, and then monitor that, you can do that. But so I think we're in a profession of which there are many participants, and the professions, the professionals should not only be those who render the service. The professionals should also sit right across the board, and that goes from the consultant to the contractor to the client. And because infrastructure, one was probably distinguished between public infrastructure and private, call it infrastructure. If I build on at my house and I want to put up another story and put in a floor slab, I think it's a different approach that you need than when you've got public involved and large public money. I know the next question will be why this one, not the other one? It's easier probably for the layman to judge what he will get and what he will not get when you talk about small things that people see around them and that they're involved with in community or in societies. But when you talk about large infrastructure systems, transportation systems, roads, bridges, dams, reservoirs, power stations, it's an environment of professionals, and we should not try to scale it down to say that we expect professionals in one corner and the rest can be anybody. But I think everybody knows that. But it also, so mentorship goes across the board. Mentorship is not only in the consultant or the contractor's office. Mentorship also sits at the client's office. Yeah,
Thank you,
a lot said, but I don't think I've given the full exact answer. But I think maybe a short answer in summary. We need people across the board that understand the profession.
Thank you so much. I mean, like you said, I think you said in the beginning before you answered that it is a complex answer and there's many answers to this one particular question. I would like to now launch our third poll before we go on with our discussion, which will pop up on your screen shortly. It asks you, what are the implications of a lowest bidder gets the work approach in engineering and construction industries? Is it shoddy work, cost saving, or competitive pricing? I think our panelists have kind of given you a view and have answered and given your views on this question. We'll give you 20 seconds now to answer the poll question, and then we'll discuss further. All right, thank you so much to everyone for participating in our poll. As a follow-up to that, Naomi, there seems to be kind of a notion that the lowest bidder means shoddy work. How is the value for money determined in this particular instance? Is it true that the lowest bidder automatically means that you're not going to get your value for money, or is it just has to do with competitive pricing and cost-saving methods?
Hi, I think it's probably a combination of all. The lowest price doesn't always result in shoddy work. If I get the lowest, if I go in very low and I still feel committed to provide quality service, the client is going to get quality work, but I'm going to be out of business at the end of the month. So it's just a kind of a ripple effect. I think you look at cost saving techniques, which we discussed during the various presentations, and how that only takes you so far. And it ultimately results in somebody paying a price somewhere down the line. So even if the work performs, if you perform, all your duties well at that low price, there's a price to pay further down the line. So, and I think as the further we go down, that's when the shoddy work comes into play, because it's just a ripple effect that comes through from there. But I think it's definitely a combination of all three.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Patrick, I think I'd like to also ask you this question with regards to, competitive pricing. There is a couple of comments from our viewers who talk about the fact that the reason why there are discounted prices and people try to come in as low as possible is because they feel that big companies are competitive, smaller companies cannot compete as effectively with bigger companies. Do you think there is some sort of pressure from companies to come in lower just so that they can get that particular project?
Well, I'll come at this from an angle. If you read the CESA biannual reports, I think the contrary is actually the case. If you look at their reports, and the last one I read, the large companies are actually the ones who are suffering the most decline in revenue compared to the medium and small companies. So the data doesn't support that assertion. But one point that should be made about value for money is the bread and butter of any consulting firm or any contractor is repeat work. If I work with a client, I want to make him as happy so that the next time he has a job, he looks my way, especially with private clients. And oftentimes, value for money, you don't know it until it's too late. So he may design a slab, that slab, except for the issues during construction, maybe delayed information, reworks, but it probably it's far down the line. Or the slab may stand, but in a few months or a few years, you already have cracks. So unfortunately, I think it takes an informed client who has the right set of skill to discern a competent professional at the onset to make these decisions. And what you pay for is what you get. You may not see the outcomes initially, but at some point, if you pay too cheap, you're going to see it. It's going to manifest, but then it's too late. The only consequence for the professional is that you may not get a repeat job. But for that project, he's backed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for that. We were struggling to get Trevor in, and he was not able to hear us properly. I think there is a comment here from one of the viewers kind of saying government should start asking itself why it would rather pay twice as much and more to deliver the same infrastructure as the private sector, and why it takes them 3 to 4 times longer. I don't know if Trevor, if you can hear me, if you would like to answer that question. I think we're still struggling to get Trevor on there. There is no problem. We will try again shortly. I think the next question would then be the last question for our panelist. I would like to start this off with Chris. Can we talk about what are the best procurement methods within the consulting, engineering, and construction industry? I think you're muted again, Chris, if I'm not mistaken.
Sorry. Blah, 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 blah. I don't know.
Okay, Chris, I think, oh no, there you're back.
Okay. I think at the heart of this is we need to understand that. So when you're commissioning the services of the consulting engineer as a professional, as a client, it's almost impossible to be definitive in the scope. And by the same token, the response from the professional is also, it's not an absolute, because the scope's not absolute either. And unlike in the construction process where you've got a bill of quantities, you've got items, and the contractors will price specific items That doesn't exist in the process of the appointment of the consulting engineer. And we would likely need to think of, is an open tender process the most appropriate? And we would contend that it's not for the appointment of professional service providers such as engineering consultants. The better approach, but needs to be well managed, and it did work well in a few years ago, was panels that rotate and that are transparent, and companies then, based on their profile and experience and expertise, get to be on panels, and the basis for getting onto that is their track record, and you know, a whole lot of other elements. If the objective of the client is developmental, then you know, you'll have that. You try and mix and match the developmental with the experience, all of the above. But an open tender process is a race to the bottom for our industry. It explains why there's been this overly aggressive competition at the expense of the sustainability of the profession, as Uze has mentioned. And if we continue on that path, it is likely that nobody will want to be in this business, and we'll be importing those skills at huge cost. So maybe we need to fix that process that has damaged the profession, the standing of the profession, and then take a step back. So once you have those panels, they rotate. There needs to be transparency. There needs to be good reporting, so that you make sure that people are not on panels for 3 years and never see a single project opportunity, because there have been those abuses of that. And there needs to be a healthy rotation, and not the usual suspects getting the projects all of the time. And at least once you've got companies in those panels, you can then go into the project specifics themselves, and in smaller groups then get requests for proposals, pricing related, because then you know that people are in this business. At the moment, the open tender system allows for anybody to respond. Tenderpreneurs, companies who shouldn't be in this business, and then they go and shop around and body shop, or for the wrong reasons get awarded the tender, and then afterwards go and look for a company that's going to help them deliver it, which that's, you know, this is a professional service, and there must be evidence before the fact that you have the knowledge and experience to deliver quality services, so the client can derive value for money. So, you know, I think in terms of the procurement, the better way forward certainly is going to be for us to move away from a complete open tender process for professional engineering services. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are now in our Q&A session. We did ask a couple of the questions that you guys had. I did ask them in the panel discussion questions because they were relevant to some of the questions that we have in the panel discussion. But I'd like to ask this one to Naomi. One of the comments says that, a question that Chris indicated that it is difficult to fully ascertain the scope of work as a consultant. How do we manage the risk, the fees remaining the same, but the risk increases?
Exactly.
Hi. I think it comes back to being able to fully define the scope of works and a knowledgeable client. And I think there's definitely a need for client bodies to be supported and guided on this aspect, on how to develop the scope of works. And I mean, there are ways where we could look at having a certain consultants maybe coming in to support if they don't have the in-house capabilities, and then allowing for it to be a fully developed scope that goes out. Otherwise, it just becomes too risky for everybody, actually, not just the consultant. So, and in terms of the cost that down the line, it just increases for the consultant, and as we've mentioned before, for the client in terms of the infrastructure itself. So I think that scope development at the beginning becomes critical. But I think the other aspect is also, if the one that Chris mentioned, if you're bringing on consultants or professionals that are familiar with what needs to be done and familiar with this type of work, then they already have the knowledge of what it should be, and possibly able to fill in the gaps and say, this is what we are able to provide, and this is what we've noticed on previous projects that we needed to do, and that clarification process can happen during the tender stage as well. So allowing for professionals only or experienced professionals to come in and tender for specific types of projects is also beneficial to the client, in that they will foresee some of the gaps that the client may have left in place. So that's some of the recommendations I think that could be used. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. There, I think I would like to ask you this one. It says that one of our viewers asked that they're saying that they're not sure that they fully agree with the panel process. Should it not be more based on quality and cost-based method with adequate RFPs and properly adjudicated? I think this comment cut off, but I think the person is asking that besides the panel going the appointment of panels, rather than going that process, should it not be more looking at the quality and cost-based system with adequate RFPs?
Hi, okay, thanks for that. I think, the entire system is based on the individuals that sort of tender, and the people who adjudicate it. So if it's such that people are willing to, I mean, the whole system is created based with those things in mind. But if people sort of ignore those bases because they realize, they could, maybe get it for less, or they reduce their quality because of the willingness to go cheaper. That I think is also the base of the problem. I don't think there's systems that are in place that will work very well. The panel could be the one of them. There could be more, and the one that you mentioned now could also work. But ultimately, if you're going to have people who are adjudicating and the people who are tendering that don't have maybe the right objective in mind, and that's delivering the right thing hopefully at a reasonable price, then it's not going to work out. So for me, it's more of a underlying issue rather than. I think the systems, you could pick a perfect system, and if the people are not willing to apply it, don't want to, they just won't. They'll find a way around it, and you'll end up in the same situation. So I've seen places where it has been implemented correctly. You don't necessarily. I've seen places where people have not given the cheapest because they've looked through the panels and they said, okay, that's the one I'm choosing, and it's in between. And if I've seen it happen, then surely it's possible for everyone to be mindful of what they're choosing, not to ultimately see the bottom line and go for it. Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you so much. We're getting a lot of comments, so I'm going to read one of the comments. It says that one of the challenges in the consulting service procurement is the issue of ghost engineers that are being submitted under the bidder's submission. Can ECSA database be linked to the CSD so that the registered engineers submitted for tendering purposes can consent through the ECSA database? This will assist in combating high discounting and will assist to protect the interest of professionals, resulting in the individual registered professionals drawing benefit, as well As well, why can't the CIPC start categorizing the registration of companies and make the requirement for the company for engineer services to have a registered professional as a director with above 51% shareholdership? I think, Patrick, would you like to kind of answer that one?
Well, I think there is merit in the CESA playing a more active role, and I would like to tie this with the point Chris made about the panel. If I understood what he was trying to describe about the panels, and draw an analogy with the medical insurance industry. The medical insurance network has a list of pre-qualified doctors, all equally competent, and so it depends on your location. And let's draw an analogy with the consulting engineering profession. In the Eastern Cape, for example, there isn't enough capacity, but CESA has a registered database of pre-qualified consulting engineers operating in that area. And we have kind of a panel system to, make sure that work goes around to sustain, because for me, the bigger picture is sustaining the profession, making sure that work goes around the engineers and consulting firms in that space. So yes, it has to be transparent. Yes, it has to be open. But I think there's merit in that. A grading system similar to CIDB, yes, and that would be necessary for categorizing the complexity of tasks assigned to a particular consulting engineering firm. So I think, yes, there is merit in that, but it is the mechanism to put all of this, in motion. Who are the stakeholders and who's going to drive the process? I think that is the real question.
Thank you so much. I think I will give this one to Jan. We're getting quite a couple of comments and questions with regards to the discounts. And one of them says, when submitting a discount, shouldn't the reason means of how you are able to offer this discount be described or justified in the document itself? We are getting a lot of comments about people also talking about, would it not be better to completely scrap the discount option and have companies just kind of qualify on the merit of quality of their work and their profession? So I'm mixing this question into one. I see we've gotten more than 5 questions with regards to the discounts. So can you maybe talk to us about this one comment about when submitting a discount, shouldn't the reason means of how they are able to provide this discount be kind of described and justified?
Yes, thank you very much. I think that's a very good point. While we were talking, I was sitting all along and thinking, we must remember these professional fee scales that we have are just an indication of, fees. So when we talk about discounted fees, I think we're talking about the wrong thing. We should talk about relevant fees and not discounted fees, because the fee scales are guidelines. They're guideline fees. So very good point that one would like a professional service that comply with certain requirements and with the scope and with the specification. And if somebody can offer that service in an innovative way, I think that's fantastic. So for me, I think the guidelines are there to help someone to get an idea where more or less the fee should be. If somebody comes along with some lower fee, motivated and with a certain definition of scope and options, I think that can be nice. It brings me back to, the database that I'm advocating is, we're all sitting talking around and around. You get different clients and different projects and different consultants and services. The more information we've got, the easier it would be for professionals at every level, consultants and clients, to judge whether they are pitching more or less at the right level, and I think that can be valuable.
Great, thank you so much. I think most of the other questions that we did get in the comments, we did get our panelists did answer, but there is one particular question that they are posing to Chris that I would like to ask. One of our viewers asked, would strike action be an option, which is a mechanism used everywhere else? Whatever is being said is public knowledge and everyone knows this at all levels, yet nothing changes and the system is broken. we get squeezed and squeezed until nothing is left. Engineers by nature, we want to do the right thing, but sometimes we need to do the hard thing. I don't see this as a solution, but perhaps it should be thought about.
So, yeah, thanks. Nice, interesting perspective. I think, unfortunately, you know, social activism and culture of withholding services or striking or so on, amongst professionals, you likely will not find, simply because it just takes one or two to break ranks, and then the whole system tumbles. It's, you know, that works well in, you know, in issues that affect society directly as a collective, much as we had, you know, in pre-94 that brought about the necessary changes in government. But in this instance, you know, there are talks about how is that a mechanism that could be used. But unfortunately, we are not as united a profession as what we should be. And it always becomes a quandary for those who then, in the face of being forced to discount, refuse their services or withhold it. We are aware of companies who do that because they pride themselves on their quality and their reputation, and rightfully so, because they have a good international standing too. So it's not as though they are overpricing and that's it. It's what they believe and what has kept them sustainable. And, you know, the proof of the pudding of that kind of action, unfortunately, clients who then continue to expect that tend to learn, you know, only after having burnt their fingers. In one particular instance, and if we take that kind of protest or strike action, and I say, well, I'm sorry, I can't do it for the price you're asking me. That is, you know, the most competitive or the most efficient in my pricing I can offer. And the client then goes elsewhere, and they find that they have a whole lot of problems, lots of trouble. We have particular instances where they've actually gone right back to the original, their initial company, and says, please help us. We're now sitting with a mess which we need to unravel. So, you know, it would be great if more companies could adopt that stance. But as I said, you just need a few to break ranks, you know, and they get a whole lot of projects, and you know, we then lose the purpose of, you know, what we'd hope to achieve. So, you know, it's not as simple as I think a few years ago, some of us might recall there were a couple of elderly ladies on a bridge all chanting, pay back the money, pay back the money, pay back the money. I really, it would be interesting to imagine all of us engineers and professionals, built environment professionals, standing together with placards, not at Lutuli House, but at the union buildings, to make our point and get it across. It sounds like a wild idea, but you know, I don't know. I think we've got really much bigger challenges, this being one of them that we're discussing today. And maybe we need to elevate this as being one of the causal factors that have created those service delivery challenges that, you know, rather than it coming across simply as a pay your engineers, and then it gets misinterpreted simply as, well, you know, they want to make a lot of money, which they should, but it's not only about that. There's a consequence, and we need to be talking up the consequence, and maybe that's where society can become more cohesive in such protest action. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Chris, for that, and thank you so much to to everyone for participating. We have to cut it short here. We went over time a bit. I think there's a couple of comments still coming in. I think one comment that is very interesting to read is that I'll read one or two comments, then we'll close now. It says another consideration to give is that government clients are under pressure from Treasury to appoint the lowest tenderer, and they get into trouble for ignoring the lowest tenderer in attempt to mitigate that risk. So Treasury should also be given an opportunity to take part in this discussion. Some people are also saying a general problem in our industry is that we have to discount fees on a scope that is very vague at the start of the project, and one does not have an idea at the start where the investigations and options are. And generally everyone is kind of in agreement with regards to what the speakers have said and what all of our panelists have shared. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our viewers and especially our panelists who took the time for joining us today and to sharing what has been kind of a robust and very insightful discussion. We hope that this has provided some key insights, and this will also help to kind of propel us to have more conversations like this and more in-depth conversation. If we didn't manage to answer your question within the Q&A session, or you would like to engage with us regarding that, please do send an email to CESA at general@cesa.co.za, where we will then be able to kind of channel your emails to the right people to answer your questions. Thank you once again to all of our viewers and our panelists. This concludes the webinar for today. Until next time, thank you and stay safe.
Thank you.